All right, I wanted to talk about some Persona 3 reviews out there by critics, and in my last video, I had given them a bit of flack for not being as interesting or passionate as fan reviews are going to be, as user reviews are going to be, because, they're not going to, let's say, call Sega fat and promise to steal their content because they don't like their business practices. Nothing as interesting as that, and you're most likely going to end up with a review that sounds something like this one here. Persona 3 Reload is a flawless reimagining of one of the most impactful RPGs of the PS2 generation, and manages to carefully preserve just about everything I loved about the original game in a stylish, bombastic package. And, like that. And there's nothing wrong with that, This is a job for all these critics, and you want a certain level of professionalism. That's totally fair, but that doesn't preclude them from sometimes having, let's say, a hot take or two. And, even before we get started on the reviews, there's things I'm worried about with the Persona 3 Reload. Remaking certain aspects of the original. For example, I had read this Kotaku article that's a hands-on impression, so they only played like the first 45 minutes, I believe it was, and they talked about how they didn't like the fact that the music was being remade as well. And so that'll be interesting to listen to that while playing the game. I didn't want to listen to it on its own before I got a chance to play it in the game. Just to see how it'll impact my view of it. But now let's move on to the fun bit. Let's get into the reviews. Let's start off with this one from Rock Paper Shotgun. Persona 3 Reload review. A high school reunion better left in the history books. Personally, not my cup of tea. All right. So I skimmed through this review, and there wasn't anything too, let's say, scathing until the end, but except for maybe this bit. So goes an average day in one of the very, very many days stuffed into Persona 3 Reload's year-long taste of demon-slaying high school life. A charming fantasy? Perhaps. There's plenty here for fans who don't mind an old-school approach to grinding while exploring heartfelt, albeit cheesy friendships. Those who don't get on with the anime tropes, though, might find it exhaustingly written and repetitive. So already not a good impression of the game. And so, just going on to describe the game. The only thing odd I saw, or not odd, it just stuck out to me. He was comparing the combat to Pokemon. And I get it. I guess it's it's a good shorthand. Everyone knows Pokemon. And, very similar with the weaknesses system, I suppose you could say. But other than that, it was mostly their commentary about the writing, for example. For the most part, the writing isn't so much on the nose as it is hammering your nose into your skull. One cliche about believing in yourself or friendship or not running away from your problem at a time. And then also going on to describe how they didn't appreciate Junpei's perviness, let's say. This last bit is, I guess, the juicy part, you could say. More importantly for me, any shot at depth or profundity misses the mark entirely, which is unfortunately what the main plot spends most of its time aiming at. Characters are wheeled out with traumas and grievances I couldn't bring myself to care about, because they don't talk or act enough like real people do. Their thoughts and actions swept along by dogmatic adherence to predictable, played-out notions of revenge, duty, and unsubstantiated nihilism. No wisdom Persona 3 can impart goes beyond the notion that life sucks sometimes, but it's still important to keep fighting, to believe in yourself, and above all, to embrace the power of friendship. If you don't mind this kind of cheesiness, maybe the more heartfelt moments will land for you. For me, it's emblematic of writing that relies on appeals to generic truisms rather than genuinely naughty moral, existential, or personal problems, which I took issue with. I mean, like, I get it. A lot of anime is kind of like this, where, you know, oh, power of friendship, believe in yourself, keep fighting. I don't see any problems with these, other than, like, you want to say maybe, oh, these are cliche, like it's overdone. But I say if it's done well, it's done well, you know. If you enjoy something, you enjoy something, and yeah, clearly they just didn't enjoy it, I suppose. But, you know, kind of bashing on the writing here, but it gets to a point which I find interesting. Perhaps for you, anime characters not acting like real humans is all part of the buy-in, and it's silly to expect otherwise. That's fine. In the past, I very much enjoyed shows with a similar friendship-worshipping ethos, swamped as they are in earnest cliche. They don't move me, though, and a 20-minute TV show is a better context for me to enjoy characters as quipping, plot-propelling toys rather than people. Anime trappings don't let me see them as anything else. It's just being so ruthless, especially, like, I was taking a look through just some of these photos you put up here, but this one really sticks out to me when you're talking about the writing. And man, I really feel like this one of all of them flew in the face of what he was speaking about, just because, like, for example, this couple, there's a persimmon tree at your school and they don't want it taken down because it was put there in memory of their late son. And it's like, you know, you're just dealing with them and the talks you have with them and how you kind of remind them of their son and stuff like that. I don't want to spoil too much, but just leaving it with that. And, you know, some of the other stories that deal with death or deal with people just in a bad place in life, I feel, you know, no, I'm not going to get into the main story at all. I'll just leave it there. I don't want to spoil too much, as, you know, there's probably people, first-time players. And maybe, you know what? This game did come out in 2006, so if I'm giving this person any credit here, you know, maybe a lot of the things it does, or a lot of the story tropes, you know, you just can only watch them so many times, only play them so many times. But for me, I just went back to Persona Fez, like, maybe a year ago or so, and I loved it. So it's like, you know, to each his own. For me, enjoying anime comes down to whether I can weather the inevitable anime tropes, and here they overwhelmed my flood defenses. I found little solace in combat that was either overly cruel and grind demanding, or mindlessly easy, yet always agonizingly repetitive, even on the easiest and therefore speediest difficulty. Nah, it's, yeah, you know, you know, the game has multiple difficulties. You know, anyone can play at whatever difficulty they want. You know, it's completely fair. It's completely fair. I'm sure existing fans will be pleased with the modernizations, and newcomers who want cheesy anime, low-stakes conversations, and dungeon crawling will find plenty to love here. But if you're Persona curious, I'd be wary leaving your giant street coffin. And already, like, in my mind, it's not that bad. That last sentence, I'm like, I'm sure if you're a fan of this, and, you know, I've just been bashing the writing the whole time. I'm like, oh, you know, if you're a lame brain idiot, you might enjoy this game. If you're an ass, oh my goodness, if you're a dumbass who loves cheesy anime tropes, you might enjoy this. What I came across, that's probably me reading into it, but moving on to this is definitely the one I wanted to centerpiece this whole video on. So this is the Polygon review of Persona 3, and just the headline alone got to me. Persona 3 Reload chases Persona 5 and stumbles. Atlas 2016 RPG continues to reshape the entire series' identity, which is interesting because it's like Persona 3 already kind of did that. It kind of reshaped everything and built that template for Persona 5. And not like Persona 5 didn't add quality of life changes, or, you know, like obviously multiple generations had passed since Persona 3 to 5. So obviously visually and graphically and mechanically things have changed quite a bit, but it's still that same core gameplay loop from Persona 3. Like, not much has changed in a very macro, I guess, way. Like, you know, it's still part dating sim, part dungeon crawler, you know. Persona 3, but this next part though. Persona 3 was always a bit of a black sheep. A black sheep is absolutely the wildest thing I did not expect to see from any review calling Persona 3 a black sheep. Now, at first, I thought maybe I'm, you know, misinterpreting what they're saying. Maybe black sheep has a different meaning that I'm not quite grasping. So let's look up the definition of black sheep. If you describe someone as the black sheep of their family or of a group that they are a member of, you mean that they are considered bad or worthless by other people in that family or group. And that's usually what I think of when I think of black sheep. And synonyms would be disgrace, rebel, maverick, outcast. And let's go into more descriptions. A member of a family or group regarded as not so respectable or successful as the rest. A sheep with black fleece, you'd figure. A person who causes shame or embarrassment because of deviation from the accepted standards of his or her group. Brutal. But maybe it is a black sheep in 2006 when you have Persona 1 and 2 to compare it to. So I guess if you're a Persona 1 and 2 fan, you'd think, yeah, Persona 3 was a black sheep back then. But at this point, it's pretty much set the standards. So let's move on. It's established the foundation for the RPG series as we know it today, which is a wild thing to say with these two sentences right next to each other. A bit of a black sheep established the foundation for the RPG series as we know it today is just wild. But you know, okay, I'll stop ragging on the black sheep thing. Maybe they meant something else, whatever. But its oppressive ambience and bleak storylines were a far cry from the flash and verve of the game that followed. With Persona 3 Reload, Atlus revisits the past, but it does so in the shadow of the series' most approachable game. Persona 5 looms over its predecessors still, and Reload makes that more apparent than ever. Oh man, just so already like kind of dogging on it. It's like the Persona 5 is the gold standard for everything, and I don't think it was Polygon. I think it was IGN that had put out a review for Shin Megami Tensei 5 and stated it was Persona 5 without the heart. And it's like, man. But it's just so funny. These comparisons are crazy. Especially like, let's just keep moving on, you know, and they go on to describe, you know, what the game's about and all that stuff. But what we're interested in is in the juicier bits. And you know what? As wild as that opening was, there are some points where I thought they had made some really good points. Some perhaps agreeable points here. In contrast, the influence of Persona 5's conceits leaves Persona 3 Reload in a state of inner conflict. The story and themes do most of the heavy lifting in maintaining a semblance of unique identity. It's striking yet memorable to explore such a bleak world, with high schoolers constantly shown shooting themselves in the head with fake guns, a police officer serving as the main weapons vendor, and character arcs that don't exactly result in a happily ever after outcomes. Sadly, the tone is constantly compromised by a presentation that's too colorful, flashy, and refined for this material, pushing the spectacle and fidelity over grit or atmosphere. It brings sophistication to an ambience originally renowned for its grim trappings. And you know, as far as I know, the original was the same way with its, I guess you want to say it's grim trappings, but I thought of that more in the writing sense. I don't remember Persona 3, the original, being this like grimy, gritty game. I think that all the menus back then, I understand it's a PS2 game from 2006. I understand that. So it's going to look a little rough. But I don't think that was their intention. I think for back then, it was pretty slick, especially for, you know, not like a AAA budget game. But even with that said, I think I might understand, like, if you just take the Persona 5 style and then just slap it on top of Persona 3, there might be that, you know, that inability to sync both the writing of the game plus the style of it. Like, it's like Happy Tree Friends, like that consistent tone won't be there. So that's really interesting. I'm gonna have to keep that in mind while I'm playing, because, like, yeah, it does look very slick, and I imagine the menus and the slick motions and animations are gonna really impact on how you feel about the game, especially when you're spending like 80 hours playing it, right? But moving on from there, I thought was interesting. Oh, right here. Yeah, next paragraph. This obsession with modernization also rectifies the lack of hand-holding in the original, which made for an interesting friction that discouraged min-maxing. When looking at the overworld or your minimap, most social links and requests are automatically marked for you. If you're unsure of what to do after school, your phone now acts like the one in Persona 5 or even in Grand Theft Auto 5, listing text messages from confidants inviting you to hang out, or mailing list ads from restaurants reminding you of part-time jobs and other activities. If interacting with more than one menu sounds exhausting, you can just select a notification and automatically fast travel to the spot. Sure, social outings were often obtuse originally, but there's little sense of discovery now. Atlus has overcompensated and made things too simple, like Royal. Everything becomes a checklist to promptly tackle and move on. And this part I gotta disagree with. So I just mentioned, you know, you're already spending like 80 hours with this game. Most likely, if it's anything like the original, plus probably bonus content that they've added in there as well. And so, you know, maybe I don't want to mess around and figure out who can I hang out with today? Like, what's going on? Especially, like, imagine I drop the game for a week. I'm completely screwed. I'm like, oh yeah, what was I doing? Where was I? Like, no, come on. These quality of life changes Persona 5 brought, I feel like that's all that anybody wanted, because there's some people who have never played Persona 3 who refuse to play it. Like, oh, not likely, like absolutely, because of the quality of life changes that Persona 5 brought that spoiled that audience for it, right? And like, does anybody, you know, you definitely can't say this about the combat system, okay? Or anything to do with the mechanics with Personas. You cannot out there tell me that you enjoyed fusing Personas and getting a randomized list of skills, a complete bullshit generated list of skills that, and then what? Okay, cancel out fuse until you get the right one. Do that like 6 or 7 times for each persona that you're gonna fuse together, just to get the maybe 2 or 3 skills that you wanted. No, you're already spending so much time with the game, you know. I don't appreciate the obtuseness. Maybe you know, maybe there's an argument out there, like I can understand for something like Dark Souls maybe, or something like that. But I don't know, maybe it's just the style of game, you know, like it just doesn't suit the, like, oh, things are obtuse, you just gotta mess around in the overworld until you figure it out. But moving on from that, the dungeon crawling of Tartarus, perhaps Persona 3's most outdated aspect, is shinier now, but just as empty and repetitive to navigate, and that is probably one of the more disappointing things to hear. I would hope that they would have made it less, I guess, like procedurally generated, more, was it procedurally generated? I don't know. Okay, so throw that out. More like, less like random shit slapped together. How about that? Let's say that. And, you know, more made with craft. Of course, there's like, how many floors again? Like 150? No, maybe more than that. I don't know. Anyways, a ridiculous amount of floors to crawl, so I understand the challenge that would present, but it's still a shame to kind of go through like the same wall texture places for like 50 in a row. Characters now talk to one another more often, so that's at least a plus, and there's some artificial variety added in with the breakable objects that sometimes grant loot, but everything else has been streamlined. The fatigue system is gone, which is, I think, a shame. I think I would have liked to see them maybe integrate it better, maybe make it less annoying. I don't know, like, I'm thinking about Yakuza 6's digestive system, where you just eat a bunch of food and then you take, you know, pills to help you digest it quicker. You know, maybe in this game you could get coffee, or if you're sick, you can get, like, herbal teas or whatever. I don't know. You know, little medicine, you know, headache medicines and stuff like that. Would have been fun to see if they could have made it work, but, you know, they stripped it out, you know, and I didn't miss it in Persona 4 and 5, so I guess it's fine. Which means nothing is stopping you from tackling new sets of floors in the dungeon on the first day they're unlocked. And I guess, you know, it kind of is a point towards the whole min-maxing thing, because if you just want to do everything on that first day, all the dungeon crawling all out of the way, which I like to, get that done with in one day, then you can. There you go. While your crew doesn't gain experience unless they're in your party, grinding isn't as necessary anymore. After spending a new in-game currency to open special chests, there's a chance to unlock an additional room in which you can boost the level of 2 characters at a time to catch up with the rest, which I really do like. I think it's vital in the Persona games to kind of use your full party, but I just like doing it anyways, whether or not I needed to. Because, you know, even in games like that have like tons of characters, like Fire Emblem or Triangle Strategy, I love using all the characters, so I really appreciate mechanics like this to like kind of keep all your characters on a level playing field. So that's much appreciated. That's a good thing. I didn't learn until reading this. In recent years, Atlus seems determined to remove a large part of the character from the series in its obsessive pursuit to capitalize on Persona 5. The success of the 5th entry is well regarded, but its popularity has resulted in a tidal wave, retroactively rippling through its lineage with mixed results. Regardless of how many refinements are made, the fatigue of the Persona 5 likes is starting to set in. It's unfortunate that Persona 3 is being brought to the spotlight under these new standardized criteria. After all these years, it's become just another sheep in the herd. Oh man, this is brutal. Like, especially like, I get it, Persona 5 was big, but like, just to give you an idea of like how maybe Persona 3 and how big of a deal Persona 3 and 4 were, especially 3, because it changed everything. It completely changed Atlus as a whole, as their whole company. I felt like had a huge impact. But it's like, the way you would read this article, if this was your first exposure to Persona, you would swear like no one had even heard about the first 4 games. But to give an example that, like, you know, those at least 3 and 4 really had an impact. Persona 4 Golden, which was a what do you call it, like a, I guess like a definitive edition that was only available on the PS Vita, and then 10 years later, or like however much later, like I think it was almost 10 years later, they decided to release it on PC on Steam, and it sold like 1 million at least units. Just the idea that like Persona 3 and 4 had no impact, and yet Persona 5 is this huge game that came out. Kind of ridiculous. But you know what? I enjoyed thumbing through both those reviews. You know, I'll end this video on this. Infinite Wealth had its own little controversy with ripping out New Game Plus and then charging an extra $20 or so for it. And I wouldn't so much say it's a controversy for as much in Persona 3, but the answer was not included in the Persona 3 Reload remake. But there is leakers mentioning that it will come out. No news, or at least there's no plans for the female main character to show up. But this is where I would leave it, like asking the audience, I suppose. I don't know how to feel about this. So the answer is around 30 hours long if you're just playing it for the main story. And completionist is like, oh my, it's double that. Now, keeping in mind it was only polled by 135 people, so, you know, that might skew it a bit. But a not so insignificant amount of content. And does it reek of like taking it out of the game and like, oh, we'll just charge them later for it more? Or, you know, is it a little bit much like, oh, come on, like this is a lot. This is a lot of content to be including in one packaged full game, considering it's not like some sort of port or anything like that. It is a full top to bottom remake. Keeping that in mind. So that's a question I'll leave with you. And yeah, like, comment, subscribe, my fellow cheesy anime lovers.